The New England coast is dotted with many beautiful harbors. These harbors are surrounded by sturdy lighthouses which guide the mariner through treacherous waters. Some of these lighthouses are haunted. Without a trusty light, harbor waters could spell disaster. When approaching, sailors strained their ears for the friendly sound of a bell or a horn. Their eyes were fixed for the sight of a beacon. A lighthouse with its trusty beam and bell pealing through all kinds of weather, sending a resounding signal, pointing the way for a safe passage. These lofty towers could be found perched high on granite ledges. A place considered impossible to build on, but here they stood, solid, rugged, and pure. They were built in harmony with sea and shore to withstand Mother Nature at her worst. These lonely vigils, standing alone, were isolated. They were remote, but energetic and alive. Their beacons never failed. The trust and security seamen found was made possible by a never-ending vigil kept by a lighthouse keeper and his family. The keeper's watchful eyes, their alertness and constant care kept these treasured landmarks shining and ships out of danger. Lighthouse keepers never let down. Working against all odds, they were unique, distinctive, and in a class of their own. They had nerves of steel. Hardships, hunger, loneliness, and constant danger were all a part of their daily existence. And here is where some of them died, victims of a tragic event, an unusual calamity, or disaster. Some of them, even after death, refused to leave their watch. Their spirits continue to live on. A ghostly spirit staying behind, known as an apparition, remaining at the light station, perhaps for some personal reason. These ghosts of former keepers or a family member have made their presence known throughout many New England light stations. The light keepers who have lived with these ghosts all agree on one thing: they are real and they exist. No one can predict exactly when a ghost will appear. A ghost can be around for a short time, or its presence can be felt over many years. Strange and unusual events have occurred, some good and some bad. I am sure ghost stories have been expanded as part of American folklore and legend, but to the keepers and their families who experienced the unusual, who saw the ghosts, their strange and impressive stories must be told and believed. Our ghostly journey begins in Maine at Seguin Light Station. Seguin was built on a rock island 2 miles south of the Kennebec River. Commissioned by order of George Washington, Seguin Island Light Station dates back to 1795. It became one of Maine's most important light stations as a result of the heavy schooner traffic going up and down the Kennebec River. It is not only one of the oldest light stations along the coast, but one of the highest in elevation. Its tower rises 186 feet above sea level, and it has the distinction of being at the foggiest location of all coastal lighthouses. The foghorn is activated about 68 days per year. A once wooded island, now pretty much windswept, the setting is all here for a haunting event. Folklore and legend tell of a reported suicide and murder on the island in the mid-1800s. Supposedly, a keeper had killed his wife and himself. The death was extremely violent, as he had used a hatchet to destroy both himself and his mate. The suicide murder had taken place because it seems his wife played the same tune on a piano over and over, sometimes for hours without a break. The poor captain's normal everyday pace went haywire. His sanity turned to insanity, and his fine-tuning snapped. He destroyed the piano, his wife, and himself with his hatchet. It has been reported by passing ships that on quiet nights that same monotonous tune can be heard trickling over the still waves. Does the old captain or his wife still roam the island? You may think that is far-fetched, but let's go one step further. In the early 1970s and 1980s, a team of Coast Guard personnel occupied the island. From talking to these different occupants, I have found some interesting stories. One bosun's mate tells of several ghostly encounters. The apparition of an old captain, as he is referred to, makes himself right at home. He has been sighted many times climbing the narrow, winding, spiral iron stairway leading up to the tower. Could the old man, slickers and all, be still trying to service the light? The old captain has been seen standing behind one of the keepers as a checker game was underway. The sound of a bouncing ball, similar to a basketball, has been heard coming from the upstairs bedroom. When investigations have taken place, nothing could be found. Cold spots have brushed by some of the men when they have been polishing brass or doing other maintenance work. Jackets have been taken off hooks and thrown on the floor. Tools have been misplaced for no reason at all, and then reappear later in the same area where they were found missing from. The keepers I have talked to have also sighted a young girl running up and down the stairs. She has waved to the men on several occasions, and some have heard her laughter. It has been reported a young girl had died on the island, and her parents had buried her near the generator house. It is very possible we have two apparitions on the island, the old captain and the little girl. A very interesting area on the island is the landmass between the lighthouse and the foghorn. Seguin has one of the most powerful foghorns of any lighthouse along the coast. The horn is located on the highest point of rock on the island, which is several hundred feet away from the main lighthouse structure itself. The horn is so powerful, it is said, its volume has knocked down close-flying seagulls right out of the air. The intensity of fog in this area is the reason for such a powerful sound. Both the old captain and the little girl have been sighted in this area, and all kinds of sounds from groans to laughter seem to be prevalent here. In this area, many hauntings seem to take place. Seguin is one of the more difficult lighthouses to visit. The entrance to the main living quarters is via a trolley track ramp. A dory is hauled up the ramp, and the passengers walk up a narrow path next to the tracks. The dory is pulled up the tracks by a donkey motor. From the boathouse to the main house is a long, hard climb. A very interesting encounter with the ghost occurred in 1985. As the light station was being prepared for automation, the warrant officer in charge of the activities experienced an encounter with the ghost of the old captain. All items in the house were being packed for shipment to the mainland. The work crew had retired for the evening, and everyone was in bed asleep when the warrant officer was awakened by the shaking of his bed. An apparition in oilskins was standing at the end of the bed, shouting in pathetic tones, "Don't take the furniture! Please leave my house alone!" The warrant officer bolted out of the bed and ran to the next room. The next day, when the furniture items were loaded in the dory on the skid, he gave the order to start up the donkey engine and proceeded to lower the dory slowly down the track to the ocean 200 feet below. The warrant officer reported that the donkey motor stopped cold, the chain holding the dory broke, and the loaded boat went down the track full speed, hit the ocean, and sank under the impact. Furniture and all were lost. The warrant officer claims the old captain had a hand in this unusual experience. Never before had an event like this taken place, and according to all odds, it was an impossibility. At 5:03 a.m. the next morning, the warrant officer was again awakened by the apparition of the old man. In a pathetic tone, the old salt said, "I can't feed my family. Why did you do this?" Is the old captain still on the island? Does the little girl still roam at will? Do the two of them still float between the cracks in the lighthouse wall? And can you still hear their groans and laughter, especially on those cold, misty nights? Who or what are they searching for? The next time you pass the island of Seguin, let your mind wander and you may find your thoughts will send shivers down your spine. Ram Island Light in Booth Bay Harbor, Maine was built on a remote island in 1883. Several years previous to the construction of the lighthouse, an old mariner was shipwrecked here and died of exposure. It has been reported that the apparition of this old man still roams the island. Local fishermen, when sailing close to the island, have reported warning lights on the beach, and the next day when an investigation took place, no sign of any activity could be found. Other seafarers sailing by have reported whistles being blown to warn them off when foul weather was driving them close to the island. No whistle is on the island. Many sightings of the old man running back and forth have been reported. Does the old man in ghostly form still roam the island? Just ask a few local fishermen. Hendricks Head, Southport, Maine. Hendricks Head first flashed in 1829. It is 43 feet above the waterline. This lighthouse is now privately owned. In the 1870s, the keepers of this light saw a schooner pounded to pieces just off the rocky shore. All hands died in the wreck except for a young boy who was lashed between two mattresses. He floated ashore, was rescued by the keeper, and later adopted by the keeper and his wife. The little boy appeared to be a gift from God, as the keeper and his wife had just buried their baby daughter a few weeks earlier. The ghost who haunts this seaport area of Southport is described as an attractive young woman in her early 20s. She has been seen pacing the beach north of the lighthouse where she drowned. Her death was a mystery and still is. The night previous to her drowning, she had been sighted in the area. Some local folks spoke to her, but she remained silent. The locals did not know her, but said she seemed very refined. The next day, her body was found washed up on the beach, and some heavy weights were found strapped around her waist. No one had any idea who she was or how she arrived. No one knows if she committed suicide or was the victim of foul play. All the residents know is that over the last 60 years, many nights her apparition has been seen pacing that beautiful little crescent sandy beach near the fixed white beacon of the lighthouse. To this day, the woman's identity has never been disclosed. Many mornings, unidentified footprints in the sandy beach have been discovered. Is this poor lost soul still aimlessly wandering about? At the time of her death, some thought she may have been murdered by rum runners. She is buried in the local cemetery. This is Owl's Head Light in Owl's Head, Maine. It's a 20-foot tower sitting on a rocky ledge 100 feet above the waterline. This light was first illuminated on September 10, 1825. Like all lighthouses, it was at one time attended by a wickie. Wickie was an affectionate name given to the keeper by Coast Guard personnel. Wickies have told stories of a former keeper who died at the light station, but is perhaps not so dead. His ghost can be seen still filling the job as keeper. Present-day keepers stationed here have discovered the old captain likes to keep the heat down. The place is always frigid. Thermostats are set for a comfort zone and somehow get turned down for no apparent reasons. When the old captain lived here, he was on a tight budget and conservation of fuel was a necessity. The keeper's house stands about 200 feet down a slanting boardwalk from the precipice the tower sits on. Many keepers have reported finding footprints on this walkway leading to the light. The footprints go up but do not return. They have been seen after snowstorms and at times when the boardwalk was covered with heavy mist. They are the print of a man's boot about size 10.5. Someone is climbing this walkway, but nobody seems to know who. One keeper reported that when he followed the prints, he found the large steel door on the tower open and swinging. This door had been locked the night before and was checked twice for security purposes. When keepers enter the tower, they often feel as if someone were with them, someone breathing on their back. Many keepers have seen a figure appearing and disappearing. The old man's presence has been felt in this general area over and over again. At times, the case around the lens is opened and signs point to someone trying to light the lantern. Brass has been polished without explanation. In the keeper's living quarters, silverware has been known to rattle and glasses have vibrated. Doors have slammed shut, and some keepers have reported seeing the shadow of an old man gliding by the windows. No one seems to know who the old captain is, but he is content to have his presence felt, and he doesn't want to lose his job. Wood Island Light, Biddeford, Maine. Wood Island Light was lighted in 1808. Its height above water is 71 feet. It has endured many storms. One of the worst was in 1869, which laid the island almost to waste. The sea area around Wood Island was at one time rich in mackerel, herring, and lobster. Many fishermen have spent time in these waters, and they have some interesting tales to tell. Some of them feel the island is jinxed and has a spirit haunting it. The island for many years was the scene of some perverse activities. From strange shipwrecks to murders, the folklore of the island is rich. In the early 1900s, during a winter gale, 3 schooners were sunk on the island. Several of the crew drowned. Several other ships have been ruined on the rocks, and many crews have perished. One old captain had his ship dashed on the rocks, and when the rescue came, it was found out the old salt's wife was on board suffering from smallpox. The rescue crew promptly disappeared, but the lighthouse keeper and his wife helped nurse the woman back to health. They kept her and the captain in some outbuildings on the island until the woman had recovered from the disease. Smallpox was a dreaded disease, and the old captain was lucky to find such a benevolent keeper. The ghost on the island is thought to be the apparition of a 25-year-old drifter and heavy drinker. The story begins with a 30-year-old Biddeford Pool fisherman. In the late 1800s, this powerful giant of a lobster man built a shack on the island and set up squatters' rights. He was also a special deputy sheriff. He was joined on the island by a 25-year-old who couldn't handle his liquor. One afternoon, when the deputy sheriff returned from the mainland to the island, he found the 25-year-old drunk and unruly. He was pointing a musket at him. The sheriff tried to disarm the man, but in the ensuing battle, the sheriff was shot and killed. The drunk tried to turn himself in to the lighthouse keeper, but was informed to go to the mainland and report the shooting to the police. Instead, he returned to his rude shed on the west end of the island and put the musket to his own head. When he pulled the trigger, the bullet pierced his brain and he died instantly. Since this suicide murder took place, a ghostly figure has been seen on the island and his presence is felt. He appears friendly, and most of his tricks are of a good nature. Windows have been opened and closed. Many strange, unexplainable noises have been heard. But the most common trick is opening and closing doors. Locked doors are found open and swinging, and doors that have been left open and braced open have been slammed shut. The former keepers have lived with him as if he were one of the crew. Wood Island has always been an island that seemed to be jinxed. From the murders to the severe storms to the shipwrecks, many keepers have left here with some great stories. One old man tried to raise chickens out here. The chickens weren't good company, and the solitude took its toll. The old salt began to pace the beach. He next rowed to shore, rented a room in a boarding house, and the next day proceeded to jump out the third-story window. He died when he hit the ground. Other residents of this island have endured hard times. Fire has taken its toll. Some of the squatters have lost their dwellings when an old drunkard became careless with matches and burned the structures. The wind and rain hit this island with a ferocious blast. It has weathered some wild storms, and many shipwrecked sailors have spent a few days here. At one time, the island had a distillery and pub, but this was burned down by some drunken fishermen. Wood Island has survived since 1808, but if you were a keeper on the island, you too would believe that some of the spirits from the past still linger. The Cape Nettic Light Station, better known as Nubble Light, is located in York Beach, Maine. I am delighted to report that this station has a content, happy spirit that seems to prevail. Former keepers who have lived on the island report that an exhilarating force seems to take over when one gets to the island, and a feeling of cheerfulness and high spirits is always abundant. Whatever the season, whatever the weather, a jovial feeling can be felt. Keepers have been delighted to serve here, and most have asked for extensions of their duty. This feeling of contentment is also experienced by many tourists who visit the area. Boone Island Light off the coast of York, Maine has been shining since 1800. Its 133-foot tower makes it the tallest lighthouse in Maine, and it is also considered the most barren and remote in the state. Many keepers have told strange stories of hauntings and spirits. A pet dog that would not enter the tower, strange crying sounds, and cold spots that brushed by the body. In the 1850s, a young keeper had taken his new wife with him to the island, and they seemed to have a loving, working relationship. 4 months after their arrival, a severe midwinter gale came up. The husband drowned when he tried to secure the island boat. His young wife dragged his frozen body into the base of the tower. For 4 days, this poor, helpless soul sat with his frozen body. Huge boulders were being tossed up by the angry sea and were pounding against the tower. She climbed the 130 stairs to the lantern room 3 and 4 times a day to keep the light shining. On the 5th day, her strength gave out and the light died. 2 days later, local fishermen found her holding the frozen hand of her husband's corpse. Her mind was gone. Perhaps her screams still vibrate in the long, slender tower, or maybe it is just the cry of a lonely gull. Off the coast of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, the Isles of Shoals Lighthouse was built on White Island. The date was 1821. Just northeast of the structure, we find Appledore Island. A lady in white is reported to roam here. She is one of the wives of the famous and notorious pirate Blackbeard. He is supposed to have buried treasure on the island. One of the legends is that Blackbeard was about to be captured, and making a fast departure, left his young wife behind to guard the treasure. He never returned, and a short time later, she died of starvation. Some folks have reported that her cries, "He shall return," can still be heard on a cold, crispy evening. Others have reported seeing her apparition. In 1724, Betty Moody and her little child hid in a cave on Star Island to escape an Indian slaughter. Betty held the child close as Indian warriors searched every nook and cranny. The strain, the stress, and the chilling wind took its toll, and the child died a few days after the Indians left. Several years later, when Betty died, her spirit never left the island, and some say images of Betty and her baby have appeared in the area now known as Betty Moody's Cave. And what about Nancy Underhill, a young school teacher who drowned here? Her apparition has been seen over and over again on a ledge of rocks known as Miss Underhill's chair. This is a ledge where she would sit and meditate after a busy day of teaching. Legend has it she was washed off the cliff by a huge wave, and her body was found on the beach in York, Maine, 2 days later. At the Isles of Shoals Lighthouse, a strange event seems to occur just before severe storms. At the base of the tower, a muffled voice of a woman has been heard. Keepers have reported being at the bottom of the walkway, getting the outer building secured, and hearing this soft crying voice, the voice of a young woman. Is she trying to give the keepers some sort of a warning? What is her connection to the approaching storms? In Cohasset, Massachusetts, Minot's Ledge Light appears to be haunted. Minot's Ledge Light is considered the most dangerous light on the New England coast. The first tower was constructed in 1850. It was an iron pile light built to keep ships away from the Cohasset Reefs, a series of deadly rocks submerged under the flowing tides that were a great navigational hazard to ships traveling off the coast of Cape Cod. On April 17, 1851, a severe nor'easter blew the first tower into the sea. The two keepers on duty both drowned. The bodies of these young keepers were washed to Nantasket Beach and retrieved the next day. Minot's Light did not survive the storm of 1851. The second 97-foot tall light was built with stone over the location of the original tower and went into operation on November 15, 1860. Former keepers of the new tower, up until the automation of the complex in 1947, have reported hearing distress cries. Pipes seemed to take on a banging as if a code were being sent. It was said that in 1851, minutes before the original tower slid into the sea, the doomed keepers took a sledgehammer and pounded on the bell. This was their way of saying goodbye to their families on shore. Is there any energy force being heard bouncing around the new, long, slender tower? Or is it just the wind and sea vibrating and shaking this impressive structure? Block Island, southeast Rhode Island. Approximately 200 feet above the sea level and standing on Monhegan Bluffs, we find Block Island southeast. The 60-foot tower and dwelling are constructed of red brick. The light was first lit on February 1st, 1875. The haunting of this light is carried on by a woman. In the early 1900s, a former keeper couldn't stand his wife, so he threw her off the round staircase directly below the pedestal where the flashing light sits. It is reported this woman's spirit now roams the house. She will not bother other women on the property, but she takes great joy in annoying men. She can be heard making a fuss or causing a disturbance, and most men who have been stationed here at one time or another have found themselves in a state of perplexity. She has been known to chase men out of rooms, she locks men out of the house, she lifts beds and shakes them with violence. She likes to slam doors, and she has been known to throw objects at some of the male keepers. Keepers have reported cold spots in various parts of the house, which is always the sign of a spirit or ghost presence. Cold spots would be in an area in a room that would give one a chill when standing in that particular location. The rest of the room may have high temperature, but this one area will always remain chilly. One of the recent keepers of this light was harassed over and over, and it became so bad that one night he was chased out of his bedroom and through the house. He ended up fleeing to the grounds as she slammed the door and locked him out. It wouldn't have been so bad, but he was locked out dressed only in his underwear. It was an embarrassment when he had to call for help to get back inside. Most former keepers have experienced her presence, and she is a good topic of conversation. Another way her presence is felt is through the constant rearrangement of furniture and artifacts. Male keepers have returned to rooms and found the entire area turned around. Chairs have moved to new locations, lamps moved, and pictures on bureaus have been turned upside down. Some keepers have returned to find their clothes that were hung in the closet now placed on the bed, bureau drawers that have been opened during the night, and socks flung around the room. She moves rapidly up and down stairs to the point where some keepers have pressed their bodies to the wall as she races by. The kitchen area seems to be one of her favorite spots. Food has been thrown across the room, dishes have been smashed for no reason at all, and one keeper reports that he would find the stove burner under his pots and pans turned up full blast. He would be cooking on medium to low heat, would leave the area for just a few seconds and return to burned food. This apparition has a temper. Block Island Southeast Light Station has been moved back from the bluffs because of a losing battle with the sea. The cliffs are deteriorating, so the light was placed 250 feet back from its former location. Many times when a structure is moved, the spirit goes away. I wonder if the old lady will stay on the premise and be part of its new location. Time will tell. At Avery Point, Connecticut, we find New London Ledge. New London Ledge stands 58 feet above the water and first went into operation on November 10, 1909. This light is reported to have the spirit or energy force of a former keeper who was affectionately known as Ernie. Ernie was happily married, and he and his wife Elizabeth took excellent care of this tiny three-story building. Ernie thought he had a marriage made in heaven. The two of them were together 24 hours a day. The entire complex was built on a dangerous reef, and all the light and living area rests on a 50-foot square of concrete. The foundation of this small light station is embedded into the ledge. The station does not allow a lot of breathing room. The structure is sturdy and seems to have been built with great care and detail. Apparently, the beauty of the place was not enough, and the confinement was too much for Elizabeth. It is said she decided to run off with the captain of a pleasure boat, and when Ernie realized what had happened, he decided to end it all by jumping off the roof. Ernie's apparition still roams the buildings, as keepers have reported such things as house lights being turned on and off, the foghorn has been turned on at unusual times, and some general house cleaning takes place. Some keepers have felt a slight slap on the wrist when they went to pick up a cup of coffee. This is all credited to the spirit of Ernie. Strange noises have been heard in the hall, and when investigated, a cold spot can be felt, and an eerie stillness seems to prevail. It is quite obvious Ernie does not want to leave this unique light station, even though his spirit must be in despair because of the actions of his wife. Ernie seems to be part of the Lighthouse family. His spirit doesn't talk or has never harmed anyone, but his energy force holds up. He appears at the top of the stairs for a few seconds and then is gone. Unexplained scraping sounds, bumps, and soft footsteps are all credited to Ernie's presence. If his wife, Elizabeth, had only known how much he would miss her, I wonder if she would still have run away. All lighthouses are natural places for people to experience ghostly haunts. The smell of damp moss covering stone walls and the cracks in the towers with wind whistling through the circular walls, creating an eerie echo. Is it no wonder that your mind tells you another presence is with you? But is another presence possible? What about the unknown and unexplainable? The lamps that have been tended when no one was near, the brass that has been polished, the windows cleaned, tools taken and returned, jackets thrown off hooks onto floors before someone's very eyes, bureau drawers that have been opened and closed all by themselves, windows that have opened, and furniture that has been moved when no one was there to move it. What about the sounds, the moans, the child's cry, the hearty laugh, the footsteps running up the stairs, and then the faces, the people, the apparitions that appear over and over, year after year? When sane and sound people experience this, we know we are dealing with an unknown, something we can't create, something we can't understand, and yes, something unnatural. Until such time that we can get a satisfactory or scientific explanation as to these phenomena, we have to question and, yes, even believe. It's great fun to spin yarns and add to folklore, but it's been proven that these ghostly characters still love to live in or near their beloved lighthouses. Lighthouses will always be fascinating.